Please join me in giving a warm Pachyderm welcome to Dr. Derek Yonai.
Well, thank you for all being here. I know the weather is a little bit uncooperative, but I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to hear me speak about a topic that I think is really important, which is helping people understand that what business people do, when put into the proper context, is a moral and ethical endeavor that improves the lives of human beings in their communities. So what I'm going to talk today about is teaching the morality of free enterprise. Or the way I like to put it when I share it with lay people is, how do we humanize business education? How do we get business education back to where it's supposed to be, which is how do we improve the lives of other people by creating value? Now, the way I'm going to begin is by asking the question, well, how do people perceive business people in our society? Because how people think about you oftentimes becomes their reality of what it is you do in our social structure. So the Center for Media Research back in 1981 went out and surveyed television. And what they found was that half of the corporate chiefs on TV engaged in illegal activity, and that about 45% of all business activity on TV was illegal, and that only 3% of the business folks on TV did anything remotely productive. Now, that's insane. A world where you only have 3% of your population doing anything productive is not the world we live in. That would be a very impoverished world. That would be the world that our ancestors would have lived in, not the world where we live in today. So we know that this is wrong. But nevertheless, this is how we go out and portray it to people across the country when they watch TV. Now, you might say, well, that was 1981. We hadn't won the Cold War yet. The Soviet Union still was alive and kicking. People didn't understand that communism's gonna die. So what happened after the death of communism? In 2005, of the 16 films up for the top 30 Academy Award nominations, half of them still had business people engaged in illegal activity, and only one character out of 70 was shown being ethical while doing business. So things didn't get much better over the course of those 20 years. And in 2006, when they surveyed television again, you would be 21 times more likely to be killed or kidnapped by a business person than by a member of the mob. So obviously, we're evil. And I work in an evil building with a mission statement that we are going to put out killers and kidnappers. And yet we all know that's completely, utterly wrong. So how do we get there? How do we get to a world where the people who create value, the people who create opportunities, create job opportunities, enhance our living, are demonized in such a way? And my argument is, we've done it to ourselves. So here's the roadmap for the talk. I'm going to begin by talking about how we teach business, because that's fundamentally part of the problem. And then talk about what the proper mental model for business is, and then more importantly, why that matters in terms of enhancing human flourishing. And then the takeaway will be, what can you do about that? So when we look at business education, I'm kind of a lucky person. I've always been a social scientist. I didn't set foot into my first business school until I took my first job out of grad school. And I used to love telling my business students that, because I had an endowed chair and you had to pass my business class to graduate. And they're just like, wait, how are you a gatekeeper if you've never set foot into a business school? It's that simple. I'm a social scientist, which gives me the luxury of being able to step back and see what we're doing in this building unpassionately and being able to analyze what kind of impact we're leaving, because I didn't drink the Kool-Aid as an undergraduate. And some of the things that I saw and I still see across this country are kind of scary. For example, what do we do in a business school? We teach welding. We teach skills. We train hands. We do a very good job at training people how to do business, how to do accounting, how to manage, how to market. But the one thing we always leave off the table is, why do we do this? Why do we have business? Why are these occupations available? Why do those skills matter? You ask a business faculty member that, the response is probably, because we just make money. Like that's kind of empty. As opposed to, what's your philosophy behind using those tools? Because all we're training people to do is use tools without any judgment, without wisdom, without a philosophy of under what conditions are using those tools moral, and under what condition are using those tools immoral. It's like training somebody how to be a sniper, but forgetting to teach them the difference between the good guys and the bad guys. That's a problem. That's what we're doing in business, is that we're training people, but we're ignoring the soul. We're ignoring the human element, that we're here to create value. We're here to use human ingenuity and creativity to move us forward and create value for people. Now, sometimes I get the question, well, that's why we have accrediting agencies, right? When you look at school marketing pieces, they always have that little thing at the bottom about who they're accredited by. And the problem is accrediting agencies actually exacerbate what I'm discussing. To become accredited, you have to do something that all faculty members fear, which is it's called closing the loop. You say that in a faculty meeting, you're going to have people breaking out in cold sweats, because it means that faculty members now have to do homework. You now have to figure out, did you actually do what you said you were going to do? And faculty members with PhDs don't like being challenged. When they say, well, of course we did it. Okay, where's your data? Prove it. Whoa. So if you're a faculty member, what's the easiest way to prove you did it? Is to teach things that are easily measurable, which are skills. Not philosophy, not ideas, not the relationship between business and humanity and society, but just downright easy to measure skills. I can measure that pretty simply. So accreditation doesn't really help us on this margin. And the fact that we have a much more competitive higher education industry today, with schools going out of business, you're going to see more and more business schools competing to get those accreditations. So that way they can market themselves. But what they end up doing is they're creating a race to the bottom. As an economist, I refer to this as, it's sort of like Greshams Law. Greshams Law was that bad money drives out good money. My application here is that soulless education continues to drive out the soul. That all we're going to do is put out what I refer to as business graduates who are really good robots, but really bad human beings. We're not training leaders, we're training robots. What we need to do is train hands, but also train minds. We need to be more holistic about this. We want people to understand what they're going to go out there and do. And that's our solution, is doing both. Of course our business school graduates need to be competent. Otherwise, no one's going to hire them. That's obvious. But the value added that most schools aren't doing is also helping them understand why those skills are important, and how creating opportunities, using our scarce resources productively, continuing to help make the world a better place is a noble endeavor, and business enables you to do that. You know, we have Gen Zers running around wanting to do things that are noble, and they're doing all sorts of things that sometimes aren't very productive. Business allows you to take that noble endeavor of wanting to improve humanity, but also gives you the tool set to be able to do it effectively. So that's what we want to do, is train their hands and minds. We want to be able to produce a holistic business leader who understands, here's my tools, here's how I go about making the world a better place with them. It's getting back to this difference, that it's about relationships, not transactions. You know, you always hear people say when they do something that fits the hard, cold calculus of cost-benefit analysis and say, what, don't get upset, it's just business. And then you start to, why are you so angry? It's just business. And it's because you're being a sociopath. It's not transactional to that person. It's a relationship to that person. It's you were interacting with me, human to human. And that's what we miss. That's what we get when economics and business forgets Adam Smith. Everybody talks about the Adam Smith of the invisible hand. People forget about the Adam Smith of the theory of moral sentiments, which is it's about felt fellow feeling. It's about empathy. That's what makes a market work. It's the fact that I can put myself in your shoes and you can put yourself in mine. And we engage in these interpersonal human relationships. That as a business owner, when I create a job, that is a relationship between me and my employee. That is a personal relationship. That is a relationship between me and my vendors. That is a relationship between me and my customers. That these are human relationships, not just empty cells on our Excel spreadsheet. But when we dehumanize business and we turn it into the cold mathematics of just turning people into bricks, that's when we lose that touch base with the real purpose of business, which is to create value. If you create value, profit maximization necessarily follows. Profit maximization doesn't necessarily create value. There's a difference. One begets the other. Because economists like math, profit max is easier for us to explain. than it is for us to explain value creation. But that's ultimately the underlying principle that we tend to forget. This is an important idea, and it was something that's not new. This is by no means new. Back in 1975, there was a position that was created called the Lundy Chair of the Philosophy of Business. And the reason it existed was because in the early 70s, a business person, Burroughs T. Lundy, and a university president, Dr. Norman Adrian Wiggins, they were out at the beach and they were having a conversation about how awful business education was in the United States, how highly technical it was. And this is the early 70s. People are using slide rules, and they're complaining about how technical business education was. And what they said was, look, at our school, we want our business graduates to be different. We want them to understand why they're able to do business, why they're able to create value, why it is in a free enterprise system, not only do we have more things, more prosperity, but we're also able to do it morally and ethically by treating people as equals and treating people as human beings. So they created this position called the Lundy Chair. And one of the things that this position did was that it taught a philosophy of business course that every single student in the business school had to take if they wanted to graduate with a business degree. Now, I was blessed because I had that position for 10 and a half years. For 10 and a half years, every person running through the Lundy Fetterman School of Business with a business degree had to pass my philosophy of business course and understand that let's take everything you've learned in all your business classes and let's bring it back to baseline reality. It's about people. Here's why markets work. It allows people to create value for people and be able to do so freely, with integrity, and with dignity. That's what they wanted to create. And that left such an impact on me. I was always an economist. I always viewed it as a mathematical economic exercise of why free markets lead to a better outcome and why socialism doesn't work mathematically. But this gave me an opportunity to think about it much more deeply that, we may have won the Cold War, but we're losing hearts and minds at the same time. Why is that? It's because we've turned it into math, as opposed to turning it back into the moral philosophy that Adam Smith envisioned, of making the world a better place voluntarily with freedom and dignity. So that's what I took with me when I started my Center for Free Enterprise at Florida Southern, was I wanted to take the best traditions of what they had at Campbell University, and I took it with me and we created a center. And in 2.5 years, we were up and running. We had a full panel of activities for our students. We actually had an endowed chair given to us within our first 18 months of existence because people understood that's something we need. That's a kind of education that we don't find everywhere. And that's a kind of business education that can help save our economy and hopefully save our nation. That's also the exact same mentality I'm bringing with me to the Koch Center for Leadership and Ethics, is that we are here to humanize business education. We are here to help make sure that students who come through our business school understand that, yes, the reason you're getting paid is because you're improving someone else's life, that you have no entitlement to an income. You have to earn it. The way you earn it is you help your fellow man. You make the world a better place than it was before you got in it. This is the quote I like leaving parents with when I talk to prospective parents. It's from the naturalist Edwin Wade Teal. It is morally as bad not to care whether a thing is true or not, so long as it makes you feel good, as it is not to care how it is you got your money, so long as you got it. In the world of fake news, I still believe in reason and I still believe in facts. And I like people to be able to say, this is why we're earning income, this is why we're creating value, this is why we should feel good about ourselves. Understanding how and why things work and what role they play so they can do it more effectively. It's interesting. I've had at multiple universities the opportunity to talk to prospective parents and tell them, this is how my center makes this business school different, and this is how your son and daughter will walk out of this business school as a different person. And it's amazing how many parents come up and say, we've been to a lot of schools and a lot of business schools, and no one talks like this. They absolutely positively don't talk like this. This is great. I was concerned. I want my kid to get a job because they have student loans to pay, but I kind of thought they were trading their soul going into a business school. But I feel a whole lot better about this now. And for me, that was always what made it pay off, was that we had parents who would go to places like Duke and Chapel Hill, and they chose whatever little school I was at because it was, we're doing something different, and they understood what the value add was. Now, in order for this to function, we have to take that step back and ask, what's a healthy ecosystem for a business person who wants to create value? After all, a person wanting to create value, a principled entrepreneur, like any other biological entity, has to live in an ecosystem where it can thrive. Otherwise, it'll die. It's pretty straightforward biology. And the ecosystem we need is one where we have free market economics, where we have the ability to try things, to experiment, where people can take their ideas and see what creates value for people and what doesn't, and allow us, consumers, to vote with our dollars who's making our lives better and who's making our lives worse. So that way the people who make our lives worse just go out of business. But that's where most economists stop. We also have to have the rule of law. We need everybody playing by the same rules of the game. We can't have a world where some people the rules apply to and other people not so much. That creates uncertainty, and that makes markets work less effectively. So we need the rule of law. We need to know what the game is, and we need to know how to play the game. And then we need good governance. We need that referee who's willing to enforce the rules of the game unpassionately and unbiasedly. That referee who understands his or her job is to make sure that the game is played however the participants play it according to the rules, and the outcome is whatever the outcome is. As opposed to a referee who has a stake in the game and says, I'd really like the game to come out this way, and then make it so. 5-year-olds understand this. It's called a rigged game, and no one wants to play in a rigged game. So we need those three things, and where those three things overlap, that's where free enterprise is. People give lip service to free enterprise all the time. Very rarely do you ever understand. That's hard to obtain, which explains why poverty is the regular form of existence on our planet. Because this is difficult. It's not easy. Likewise, for those of us who are lucky to have it, it's also very easy for us to lose it if we're not vigilant about protecting those things. So that's what we need. The way I explain to my business students, because they sit there going, what are you, a philosopher? This is a business school. I'm here because I didn't want to do philosophy. It's okay. Look, Bucky, if you want to do business, how you do business depends on the kind of economic system you have. The kind of economic system you have depends on what kind of government you have. And that depends on what's your philosophy of human existence. That's why this stuff matters. This does not float off by itself in a void. That's predicated on a certain set of ideas. And if you forget those ideas, this can become destructive. It's about reminding people, here's why we have what we have. Here's why the ideas of freedom, the ideas of human dignity, the ideas of allowing people to voluntarily interact with each other have allowed us to have a standard of living that is the envy of the world. And why it is other people are striving to get that. What we need is freedom and liberty, experimentation. We need the rule of law, like I said before, and that market process. That ability for people to go out there and say, hey, I've got an idea, let's give it a shot. No matter how absurd the idea, like the Snuggie. I first saw the commercial for that going, yeah, this is wonderful. And it turns out people actually buy it. I was really amazed by that. Well, that's great because, look, I have a Ph.D. in economics. I would never have predicted that. That's the point. We don't know what people like. We don't know what people want. Markets aren't predictable. And anybody who says they are, they're lying to you. That's why we have to have the freedom to experiment. We need the market process. So let's make this a little bit more quantitative. Let's bring this deck down to reality. Like, those ideals are great. That's fantastic. But what does it mean to me in everyday life? When I was at the O'Neill Center at SMU, we had one of the largest concentration of scholars whose sole body of work is working on what's called the Economic Freedom Index. So we had scholars who worked on the Economic Freedom of the World Annual Report, and we had scholars who worked on the Economic Freedom of North America Annual Report, and they were also working on the Economic Freedom of cities and metropolitan areas. What they do is they measure how economically free different geographic regions are. And then what are the economic outcomes that attach to those levels of economic freedom? So what they measure are things like the size of government, what taxes look like, and how many governmentally owned enterprises are there. How big of a sector of the economy is the government? What's the legal structure look like? How secure are property rights in these particular areas? Do you have access to sound money? Or is your central bank inflating currency like it's going out of style? Do you have freedom to trade internationally? And then what does your regulatory market look like? So they take over 150 variables gathered from places like the World Bank, from the International Monetary Fund, and they put them together to be able to rank the different nations on planet Earth. And the reason we care about this, the reason I care about this, is that economic freedom, that quantitative measurement of how well your free enterprise system is working. That's the engine behind your prosperity. That's the engine behind the ability for people with great ideas to go out there and create opportunities that didn't exist before. If you're enslaved economically, you're not going to be very productive. It's how do we free you to create value for those other folks. So I want to get that back into business ed. I want to get that back into the conversation where business students understand, look, if we don't get the environment right for you, you're not going to persist. Or worse, you're going to mutate into something that is actually counterproductive. So this is the economic freedom of the United States from 2000 to 2016. This is based out of the most recent report that came out in September of 2018. For a point of time here from around 2009 to 2015, Canada had more economic freedom than the United States of America. Most people didn't know that. Most people are like, no, Canadians have that sort of government mandated health insurance. Look, they had more economic freedom than we did. Now, some people kind of look at that going, okay, so what does that mean? Well, here's the way I like to think about it. Canada hasn't really changed much. Canada's, if you look at their trend, it's fairly flat. It's the United States that's changed. We went from being number 2 in the world in economic freedom in 2000 to as low as 16th in the world in economic freedom by 2012. It wasn't that Canada became a bastion of free enterprise. It was that we turned our back on it, and we walked away from it. And this is why I tell people this is not an ideological issue, because this happened under both Republicans and Democrats. That's a downside. It's that you can't even vote for what color tie you like better anymore. We completely forgot how we got there. We forgot our basic principles of why freedom matters. And so we got to get that back. Here's why it matters. You make, on average, almost 8 times more in places with the most economic freedom than with the least. Income's higher because you're freer to pursue what you're good at. Income for the poorest 10% is almost 10 times greater in places with the most economic freedom than the places with the least. So this is not about making the rich richer. So the left has to lose their talking point on that one. The poorest 10% thrive with more economic freedom. They're earning 10 times more. If I were in the poorest 10%, I would rather live here than live here. If we look at extreme poverty rates, this is on living less than $1.90 a day. Only 1.48% of people in the most economically free countries live on a less than $1.90 a day, as compared to almost 32% of people in the least economically free. If you look at moderate poverty, which is living on less than $3.20 a day, 4.3% live on that in the most economically free, compared to almost 52% in the least economically free. Freedom is a human issue. It's not a partisan issue. We earn more money, we have less poverty, we create more opportunities. That's the mechanism. But this is the narrative we've forgotten. This is what we don't teach in business schools. If we look at life expectancy, we live on average about 15 years longer. Now for my 20-something college students who are like, what does that mean to me? I don't understand. It's like, yeah, I know, you think you're invincible, I get it. As you get older, not so much, but here's why it's important. That extra 15 years means you get to know your grandparents. It means you get an extra generation of human beings in your society who can pass on wisdom to you, as opposed potentially having that generation lost and having to relearn it all over again. It helps with knowledge transfer, in addition to having longer lifespans. Economic freedom is associated with greater employment. More people have jobs. We have less corruption because there's more to lose when there's corruption. We have more civil rights when you have more economic freedom. As people become empowered economically, they're more able to effectively argue and fight for civil liberties. You have a cleaner environment. We can afford the technology to produce cleaner. And we have lower infant mortality rates. So when I present this to, say, hostile crowds, the question I usually leave them is there anyone here who doesn't like any of this? Like, anybody here want a dirtier environment, more dead babies, shorter lifespans, less money, more poverty, more unemployment? And most people are like, no, we all want better worlds for ourselves. Like, exactly. So do I. And I'm sure that's true for everybody in this room. And it's true for everybody in Wichita, unless they're a sociopath and hate human beings. For those of us who are human, we want those things because those things enable us to have a better life for ourselves and, more importantly, a better life for our children. Economic freedom allows us to do that. The free enterprise system allows us to pass that legacy on. So where are we today? Where's the United States today? I told you we were as low as 16th. Today, and this is again based off of the 2018 numbers, we are ranked 6th in the world. We still haven't fully recovered. We were 2 in 2000. We're back up to 6. We are behind Ireland, Switzerland, New Zealand, Singapore, and Hong Kong. At one point, we were actually tied down with Mauritius. Again, going back to why, for me, this is a knowledge issue and not a partisan issue. We had huge economic freedom gains between 1980 and 2000. For those of you who lived through that, you remember that. Our economic freedom skyrocketed through the 80s and 90s. And we have to be honest, that happened under both Republican and Democratic presidencies, and under both Democratic and Republican-controlled Congresses. It was Bill Clinton who said the era of big government's over. We understood that. People understood what economics meant. Since 2000, though, not so much. And it's getting people back to the principles, core principles. Why human dignity? Why freedom? Why economics matters? That's not about how you feel. It's about what do we rationally know works that improves lives, if the goal is to improve lives. So one of the reasons why this is important for, say, everybody else out there other than just economists and business students is that businesses move from places where the environment isn't healthy for them to places where the environment is very healthy for them. Having been a native Californian, people are fleeing my state, my home state, like you can't believe, because it is an unhealthy business environment. In 2011, 254 companies left California. Chevron, Waste Connections, they moved jobs to Texas. Occidental Petroleum moved jobs to Texas. Campbell Soup, they closed their facility in Sacramento. Toyota moved to Dallas. When you have high taxes, high regulation, and your hands are tied and you can't create, people go to where you can. So economic freedom matters. What you see is this. If you looked at a U-Haul price from going from Torrance to Plano, it was $2,600. Going from Plano to Torrance, it was about half that. Going from LA to Dallas, about $2,500. Going the other way, half that. You don't have to have passed an economics class to understand it looks like a lot more people are going that way because it's a heck of a lot more expensive. That's why it matters. That's why things like what's happening to, say, our state's population. Where are people moving in from? Where are they moving out to? One of the reasons people move is because they're looking for economic opportunities. Freedom enables them to have that. Lack of freedom doesn't. So when we talk about economic freedom, the average world income, and this was measured back in 2012, it ranged anywhere, depending on who you ask, between $8,000 to about $10,000 a year. That's average world income in 2012. 8 to 10 grand a year. That's how much the average person on planet Earth made. The poverty line in the United States was $11,170. In that time frame, we defined being an average person on Earth as being impoverished. Now think about how great we were doing in order to be able to say, well, being average sucks. Well, if you're average, you're impoverished. That's awful. And that's what we don't remember. That's what we forget, is that what we have is abnormal on planet Earth, and that we were lucky to have it, and we're still lucky to have it. But it also means that we can easily slide back to what average looks like. I like asking my students this: how much money would it take to be a 1%er in the world? And they come up with like crazy big numbers. According to CNN, so we know this isn't like Fox News, according to CNN, in 2012, $34,000 made you a 1%er in the world. So being in a business school, that was definitely more than that. All my students were expecting to make far more than that. But they had no idea that they were actually a world 1%er. It's putting that into perspective to help us realize how fragile, but yet how awesome what we have is, and why it is we need to go out there and make sure we can still have it, so that way our children can still have it. The concern I have is that as our economic freedom continues to fall, will our prosperity fall with it? Will things not get better? Will we end up with a generation of Americans who will be worse off than the previous generation? Because that's not a place I want to live in, and I'm sure that's a place you don't want to live in. So what can we do to make it better so that doesn't take place? So the takeaways are, business education's failed. Economic freedom, as it measures our ability to have a healthy free enterprise system, impacts real lives for the better, and you can help reverse this trend. So the question you're probably asking is, well, what can I do? I'm not a professor. I don't talk to hundreds of students. What can I do? Well, you can continue doing what you're doing now. Dig into the ideas. An informed voter base means that you'll make better decisions and you'll have a better understanding of what's going on. Dig into the ideas. Wichita's fantastic. You have things like the Boss Yacht Society. You have the Pachyderm Club. You have people who are bringing you content that you can soak in, that you can own, and then go out there and help make the world better. You can get your friends interested in ideas. Depending on sort of your, religious background. That's proselytizing, getting your friends interested in the same ideas you're interested in because you think that these are good ideas. You should come to this. This is life-changing. This is fantastic. It'll help you realize we can make the world better. Get engaged. Live by those ideas that you support. Oftentimes I've had students who come in and they're upset because I can't go to grad school, but I want to make the world better. What am I supposed to do? And I look at them, I said, just sit down. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go get a job in business. I said, fine. Live by those principles and you will impact more people than I ever will. And they're looking at me like I'm crazy. And I said, look, think about it. I teach, 2 sections of 60 students? I'm like, yeah. Per semester, so that's, about 240 students a year? Yeah. Think about all the people you interact with when you go out and do business. The people you work with, the people you trade with, the people, your consumer base. You take all those people. If you live by these principles and people walk away after engaging with you and say, that guy's different, that gal knows what they're doing, that's special. You get to be transformative in other people's lives by just being you. You have no idea how important that is. Because it's one thing to stand up in front of people and say it, it's another thing to live it. And living it's harder. And you can make the world a better place by just living those principles. You can support change agents, people who want to make the world a better place, who agree with you, people you support, help them. Support things like KPI. According to Cato, the Kansas regulatory climate here is one of the best in the nation. If you want to help support local policy change that frees up creativity, there's an option. Another, and this is much more self-serving for me, is supporting university centers. Help people like me go out there and train the next generation of business people so that way they can carry on the legacy of the ideas you care about, as opposed to letting the ideas kind of wither away. And what's great about Kansas is that we have a handful of centers, but we all do something different. Some centers focus on policy. My center focuses on how do we help business students understand and university students understand that business is inherently pro-human, pro-social. So that way we can make the world a better place without feeling bad about it. This is what we're doing to try to make the world better in Kansas. We're, of course, doing collegiate education. So I teach in the business school, but we're also developing high school curriculum and elementary school curriculum to help teach economics to those students. And what I like about what we're developing for K-8 in our E-Cube STEM program is that it's not just more economics dumped on top of whatever it is teachers already have to teach. Teachers don't like that. What we're doing is we're creating STEM curriculum that has economics embedded in it. So that way it meets state standards, it covers what teachers already have to do, and we're able to add something in without creating additional work for our teachers. So that way they can go out there and teach STEM curriculum. but also have that injection of here's why these things matter economically. Here's why trade is important. We are going to start a summer program for high school students starting summer of 2020. And we're also developing on-campus student talent development. We have an Adam Smith Club, where we have students who are interested in the ideas. We get together. We have book clubs where we talk about readings, where we help develop these ideas with them, where they can challenge us or challenge each other. We have movie nights where we can bring in a broader range of students to be able to come in and talk about the ideas of freedom. We also have a nationwide talent development program. We host colloquia, nationwide colloquia twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring, right across the street over at the Ambassador Hotel. We have one coming up next month on humanomics, combining the humanities with economics and the ethics of what economics can bring to us. And we have students coming next month, not just from across the country, but we have 2 students coming from Guatemala and 1 coming from Canada. So we're having a large impact. We're also doing our public outreach. We have our governance law and economics lecture series. And we also do media pieces. So I do radio interviews and I write op-eds. They're the first group to see this. This is a pin map of where all of our alums are. So all of the students we've had on campus, or actually we've had over at the Ambassador, at our 4 colloquia come from those states. So even though we're in Emporia, Kansas, we're affecting a large swath of people around the country. And the idea for these students is to dig into the ideas while in Wichita, go home, and share the ideas and engage people on their home campus. So we have people over at West Virginia University doing that, Truman State, the College of Charleston, the University of Kentucky. We have people at Duke, Utah State, Arizona State. We're making an impact. We're helping create a better generation of people to understand. This is why freedom's important. And I want them to walk away with this notion that business is, of course, relational, not transactional. For those of you who like more information, you can go to freetheworld.com. That is a Fraser Institute's website where they have all of the data sets and the reports for the Economic Freedom of the World and the Economic Freedom of North America Index. You can also follow us on Facebook. The Koch Center has a Facebook page, and we have all videos of our GLE lecture series up on our YouTube channel for people to watch. We have some very exciting people coming in this semester. We have somebody coming in February talking about how both the left and the right have kind of missed the point on income inequality. And I have somebody coming in March to talk about a case study between Kansas and North Carolina. Why it is tax cuts worked in North Carolina, but why we had what we had here, and enabled to do that case study. So he's coming to talk to us about tax cuts work. Just because they didn't work this time doesn't mean that it's something that needs to be shoved. Let's talk about what the particulars were. So we're bringing in a policy analyst to talk about how we're different than North Carolina is. So at that point, I'm going to open up for Q&A. Yes?
We have about 10 minutes. So in that period of time, the actual first hand went up right over here. Members only, please keep your questions concise.
What are the economics and components of the Economic Freedom Index and the dip in the United States 2008 to 2001?
What were the primary drivers for that?
What is it? I mean, yeah.
So the big primary driver that eroded a large portion of our economic freedom during that time frame was the Kelo decision, because that seriously impacted our property rights score and our rule of law score. So for those of you young people, the Kelo decision came out in 2005, and I really like the way that Justice O'Connor put it. It basically means that the government can take your home to put up a Walmart. So that eroded away our economic freedom because it reduced the security of our private property rights in this country. But then we also had large government expenditures. So we were actually spending more than we were bringing in, so we had deficit spending. So that's what drove down our scores between 2000 down to the bottom point at 2012. Great question. Yes?
Do you personally, in this Koch Industries, have a position on the open border debate?
I can't speak for Koch Industries because I don't know what their position is. My position as an economist, economically, I'm a fan of open borders because if we believe in free trade, employment is trade. So for me, if I'm going to argue that trade, sharing is caring, creates wealth, it also means that trade with labor creates wealth as well. So,
Drives down the local people's income.
well, it gets back to, as much as The Daily Show is a comedy show, I do like that one clip that they had where they sent somebody out to Whammo, and Whammo was bringing jobs back to California from China to make pool noodles. And the way The Daily Show put it was, we don't want your low-income jobs. And you know, it sat there and made me laugh, but as an economist, that's the point, is that the jobs that we lose are jobs that we are better skilled not to do. You know, the way I explain it to students, and I had to do this in North Carolina with outsourcing. By walking out of a high school, you have read Shakespeare, you know how to do math. You have a skill set that means you should be able to produce more and create more than somebody who's illiterate. Why are you competing with them? This is insane. This is like a major league ball player going out and competing with a 5-year-old on a t-ball field and then complaining that they're not allowed to play t-ball. We have to put these things back into perspective. I had a student once, an MBA student, her job was outsourced, and she was angry with me because I was talking about globalization. And I asked her a simple question, which was, do you have a job lined up now? She's like, yes. Are you making more or less than your previous job? I'm making more. That's the point. We have capacity to create much more value than we give ourselves credit for. And we need to be freed up to be able to do that. Sometimes that change hurts. I admit that. Change is not easy and it's not painless. But it's about how do we create that value. Yeah.
So thank you, kind of appreciate your perspectives. I'm assuming there's not a larger percentage of people that graduate from college as there are that don't. Would that be fair?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part.
There's more kids that don't graduate from college than do.
I don't have those statistics, but
Is that generally accepted though? Is that?
you mean, now when you say don't graduate, you mean don't go and then don't graduate as well? Or do you mean people who like show up and...
Just never graduate from college.
I can't tell you off the top of my head what those numbers are.
Okay.
Yeah.
The point I was trying to get to
Okay.
is what do we do with people who don't go to college to get this kind of education? How do we broaden this kind of information out to people who are not college bound?
That's a great question, and this will probably get me in some hot water with my employer. College isn't for everybody. There are some people in college who probably would have their time better spent not being there. That's just kind of how reality is. The way we get this message down is what we're doing at the Koch Center. It's developing that K12 education component where students relearn essentially civics and economics back in those grades K to 12. So that way they walk out with the principles of stick-to-itiveness, entrepreneurial attitudes of I need freedom to be able to take these ideas I have and create value. Because you don't need to go to college to learn that.
Have you thought about any of that trade school?
Well, we're hitting everybody between K-12, so we're not just limiting our range to just like public schools or private schools. Anybody who's doing K-12 education are people we want to make sure our curriculum is available to. So that'll hit public schools, private schools, trade schools, vocational schools. We want to hit the entire swath because we think that this is absolutely positively necessary. Yep.
You were talking about a positive business environment, and a lot of times cities will provide economic incentives for businesses. Is that rigging the game, or is that just business opportunity?
That's rigging the game. This used to get me in trouble over at Florida Southern, is because we would always look into who can we give the Economic Freedom Award to, and I'd have to say, can't do that. Why not? They took tax subsidies. But look, just because you're creating jobs with other people's money doesn't still make it right. Right? Robin Hood was still a thief. I don't know why people forget that. So for me, it's still rigging the game, yes.
Are your students, as they come into your class, predisposed to socialism? And if so, why?
That's a great question. I don't take polling data. My gut says they probably are very representative of what we see in the public, which is they probably have maybe left of center attitudes, but don't know why. But the honest part about it is when I teach economics, I don't care what their ideology is. It's not about politics. When they come into my econ class, what I tell them is, look, leave your politics at the door. This is about how the economy works. Free trade is a positive, fact-based economic analysis, not political rhetoric. There's a reason why you were taught when you were 5, sharing is caring, is because when we voluntarily interact with each other, we're both better off. Getting them to understand and put aside the emotion and the partisanship and just think about just economics and human interaction sort of in a naked fashion, I guess, allows them to think through it and realize, wow, I guess trading is okay. It is better to walk into a place and do business with somebody I want to do business with, as opposed to being forced to go to like the government commissary and buy things at gunpoint. So as far as hard data goes, I've got nothing on what their political ideology is, and quite frankly, I kind of don't care. I'm more concerned with, I want them to understand the economics of how the world works, and wherever they fall afterwards is where they fall afterwards. I was at a conference once where people were like, well, what does your center do? And I said, look, my center helps students engage ideas. That's all we do. If they walk out and they're much more impassioned about freedom afterwards, good for them. If they walk out and they hate freedom, yeah, good for them as well. At least they thought about it. That's all I can do. I am not in the business of pushing. I'm in the business of educating, and then I want them to, for themselves, to own what they end up having to own morally and ethically on their conscience of being right and wrong. But at least they'll have, coming out of my class, an understanding of the economics of what those implications are. That we can either make the world a better place in practicality, or we can just keep talking about it and not really ever get there.
Last question.
Okay.
You mentioned national and state ratings for on how they perform on economic freedom. As a former county commissioner, I'm most interested in the local government aspect, that whether it's measured by city or by county. Where would you find that data, and who compiles it?
It's a great question. Right now they're using MSA Data because it's probably the best data that they have. And the place I would go look for that would be at the O'Neill Center over at Southern Methodist University. There's a scholar there, his name is Dean Stansel, and this has been sort of a project of love that he's been working on for the last 18 years of measuring economic freedom of MSAs. So he has a published article back around 2014, but the data is really old. So he's been in the process of updating that data. But if you reach out to the O'Neill Center and to Dr. Stansel, he should be able to get you up to speed on where his current research is on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.